Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
This is Jane. She thinks she's just filling her car, but she's also filling the air with cancer-causing toxic chemicals used to boost octane in gas. What doesn't burn in the engine enters the air and your lungs, even your heart and brain. Bad for everyone, especially kids. Ethanol is a natural octane booster, clean burning and non-toxic. More ethanol means less scary stuff in our gas and in the air we breathe. And that makes your choice pretty plain, Jane. American Ethanol, cleaner air for Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith analyzes corn and soybean selling strategies. Alastair Stewart explains how political uncertainty is affecting Brazil's farmers. Brian Krienke discusses nitrogen losses in Nebraska's crop ground. And Terry Hejny outlines application guidelines for Nebraska LEAD Class 36. Roy Smith is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. U.S. farmers are approaching the back end of the 2016 corn planting season. Growers have put 86% of this year's crop in the ground, with 60% emerged. Producers are 56% complete planting soybeans, with 22% above ground. Nebraska is still behind schedule in planting by 3 points in corn and 13 points in beans. The first condition rating of this spring's corn will come in the USDA's next crop progress report on Monday. We talked with Roy Wednesday afternoon about his drop-dead date for holding grain and how current trends match historical charts, but we started again by asking for a planting update in his area of the state.
Most parts of southeast Nebraska, I think, are probably done with the planting. Few maybe around here, Cass County, Sarpy County, Otoe County, but most of them got finished up over the last weekend.
How surprised are you with what's happening in the soybean market right now?
Well, I'm pleasantly surprised, I guess I'd say. We've got some bullishness in the market, and the market has had a real nice run, and usually when you get the traders all bulled up and everybody's all excited about what the potential might be, the bottom falls out. Well, it didn't do that this time, and for that we're thankful, of course. And but boy, it's great when you have a day like what we're talking about, filming on Wednesday, and seeing beans over 20 cents higher.
Yeah, and the question then is, soy, Roy, when does it end?
You're asking for a prediction there, and I'm not very good at predictions, but I guess I'm not a big believer in selling based on cost of production, but I think after the market's gone up $2 a bushel in a short period of time, you need to calculate what your anticipated cost of production is going to be and sell something based on that, because here is an example of when I think it will probably work very well.
Let me ask you this then, how atypical is this movement compared to your historical charts?
The historical charts, it's actually tracking pretty well, except that we've gotten more of a rally than what we usually get. Usually if you get 40 or 50 cents a bushel rally off the winter's low, that's pretty good. Well, here we are at more than $2 a bushel over the previous low, and it seems to be still going up. So, and that's why I kind of caution people, if you're going to forward contract beans for this fall, let's say, or corn for this fall, be sure it's at a price that you can live with, because who knows? I hesitate to say I think we could go to $11 or $12, but that target is out there, and it could happen. I'm not predicting it, but it could happen.
What does that tell you about whether or not there's been a switch from corn to soybean acres?
My perception is that any fear of the market switching from soybeans to, or excuse me, from corn to soybeans, it's not happening, because if it was happening, you would see one go up and the other one go down, and that's not what's happened in this particular case. We've seen soybeans go up, even though the rationality would say they should go down as people switch to more beans.
So compare what's happening in the soybean market now with what's happening in the corn market.
Well, corn has gone up some also, but it hasn't gone nearly as much as soybeans, and that's got a lot of people, including me, scratching their head as to why are soybeans so much better than corn. And the only answer I can come up with is that that's what the Chinese want, and that's what they're buying, and they have to go through a currency exchange, of course, so it's very difficult for a farmer here in Cass County, Nebraska, to evaluate exactly how much that's happening.
How does your selling strategy differ in corn as opposed to soybeans for that new crop?
The corn market just hasn't tracked nearly as well, but it's kind of the old paradigm that I've used for years. If you're selling soybeans, sell some corn too, because chances are eventually they're going to track together. And even though there may not be a sell signal on corn, it could still take place this year, just like it has other years.
Is the drop dead date looming?
Drop dead date, 1st of July to the 4th of July or the 10th of July, somewhere in that time period. I still believe it. If beans go up another $1 or $2 a bushel, it's going to be really hard to sell into that. But it needs to be done, especially if you can look out there and see the soybeans all nice and green, and the corn tasseling around the 4th of July.
Next week, John Moret from J.E. Moret Grain Company will be our corn and soybean market analyst a week ahead of the USDA's June crop report. We'll also look at the Environmental Protection Agency's proposal for 2017 renewable fuel standard volumes in our next episode with DTN's Todd Neely. The USDA's latest cattle on feed report shows Texas leads the nation in the number of cattle on feed yet again. Texas has been at the top for 4 of the first 5 months of the year, with February as the sole exception. Nebraska Extension livestock economist Kate Brooks says the key takeaway from the agency's estimates released last Friday was placements.
So we got the May 1 cattle on feed report. Cattle on feed inventories were up over year-ago levels. We were at 10.78 million head. The big thing out of the cattle on feed report would be placements. Placements were up 7.5% over year-ago levels. If we look, into that a little more, the big ones in it with increases in placements were in the southern plains, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. The northern plains actually saw some declines in placements. But, as we start to look at placements overall, we look at, April and go back into February and March, placements have been up over year-ago levels. As we look at that, we have an increase in feeder cattle supplies, but we also, as we're starting to place more of those, that means more placements coming out, or more feeder-fed cattle coming out of the feedlots, later this fall, which could put some down pressure on those prices. In Nebraska, what we've seen, we saw declines in the May report. So April placements, April marketings were down for Nebraska. Total inventories were down over year-ago levels, but we've been seeing increases in those in the last several years. So it's not a big cause for concern here in Nebraska at this point.
USDA's latest cold storage report showed the total supplies of beef in freezers across the country on April 30th were down 3% from March and 7% lower than the previous year. While the United States is in the middle of a campaign to elect its next president, Brazil is in the process of getting rid of its current one. Dilma Rousseff has been suspended from office and will face an impeachment hearing. Meanwhile, the country's farmers are weathering the political and attached economic uncertainty while harvesting their lower than anticipated corn crop. DTN's Alastair Stewart covers the agricultural scene in Brazil and Argentina. He joined us Wednesday from Sao Paulo to discuss the impeachment's possible impact on producers, the future for crop sizes in Argentina, and the outlook for Brazil's second crop corn harvest.
The harvest has just begun up in Mato Grosso. It started a week early, basically because of the dry weather conditions. That's the big story in the second crop corn this year. For the first time in many years, we haven't had ideal conditions for the second crop corn. with particularly dry weather in April, just when the corn was going through reproductive phases. So we're looking at significant losses. Farmers are talking about production somewhere between 52 million metric tons, which is well down on initial expectations of about 60 million tons.
How will this contribute to Brazil's overall supply of corn?
Well, the supply of corn was already tight this year, mainly because Brazil's been exporting, very, very quickly. They've been taking advantage of the price advantage that they had because of the competitive advantage they had because of the devaluation of the Brazilian real last year. And also this year, when they sold large portions of this coming crop ahead of time for export. So they're caught in a tight situation whereby they've already committed up to 70% of this crop for export, and they're looking at losses that can be in excess of that in many cases. So it's a difficult spot.
What will the final crop sizes look like across the border in Argentina?
Well, Argentina also suffered weather problems this year. Not dryness, no. The excessive rain was the problem. Again, in April, over the northern part of the grain belt, they got deluges in April in regions like Cordoba, Santa Fe, Entre Rios. And as a result, they've seen significant losses. For the soybeans, they're looking at crops anywhere between 50 and 55 million tons, which is down from an expectation of around 60 million tons. This, of course, has led to exporters looking for Brazilian soybeans instead of Argentine soybeans, because the other aspect of the rain is that it's also severely delayed the harvest.
I want to talk about future production in Argentina. The USDA believes that Argentina is going to significantly ramp up corn production by about 25% next year. Is that realistic?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, that sounds like a big figure, but when you look at the numbers planted area in recent years, you've seen that Argentine farmers have been planting soybeans to as many soybeans as they possibly can, and really limiting corn planting as much as possible. Because of the system of tariffs and export restrictions that they had, as well as the devaluation. What we're going to see next year is a readjustment, basically farmers going back to planting more like the natural corn areas for rotations and so forth. That corn area figure will also be boosted by the fact that margins for corn are probably better than for soybeans or for wheat at the moment down there.
Let's talk about what's happening in Brazil now with its president, Dilma Rousseff. Update me on where the impeachment proceedings are and what's the impact to the agricultural economy from this.
Right. Well, Dilma Rousseff was suspended at the start of the month after a vote in the lower house and then the Senate. She's suspended for 180 days, and her vice president, Michel Temer, has taken over. There will be a definitive vote in 5 months on whether she'll be impeached. But most people believe that she's gone. Essentially, there's no after being voted suspended by Congress. They see little way in which she'll be brought back. That doesn't mean the end of the political instability. Of course, a large part of the population aren't particularly happy with the idea of a Temer government. Also, the economic situation is difficult, and he will have to bring in some harsh measures to kind of stabilize the situation. That's not going to be popular. Meanwhile, there's an ongoing corruption investigation that affects large parts of his cabinet. So, there's the instability will continue. That, of course, is bad for the business environment, specifically if we're talking about farmers, bad in terms of credit. Credit will be once again severely limited this year. In terms of operating credit, farmers have been resorting to barter trades, whereby you commit future soybeans and so forth to buy your inputs. But the real kind of longer term impact will be on the investment. Obviously, you see farm equipment sales are way down, and people just aren't investing in the long term strategies for farms in the same way that they were over the previous 5 years. In the short term, what the Brazilian farmers in 2015 benefited from the instability because the Brazilian real devalued. We're not seeing that at the moment. That might happen in the future. They might get another bump, and as we've seen, they're waiting for these bumps at the moment, and they're very keen to sell on these highs.
The USDA will update its estimates for Brazil's corn harvest in its next supply and demand estimates, scheduled to be released Friday, June 10th. As we mentioned at the start of the show, Nebraska's farmers are behind schedule planting this season's corn and soybeans. Widespread and substantial rains likely contributed to the slower than normal pace. Those weather events could also cause problems for nitrogen that was applied in certain fields across the state. Earlier this week, we talked with Nebraska Extension's Krienke to learn more about how growers can manage their soils.
There's a lot of ways, unfortunately, that we can lose nitrogen. And if we'd step back just a little bit, nitrogen is an essential nutrient. And after water, it would be the second most used nutrient for most crops. We can lose it through leaching, so that's excess moisture going through your soil profile. We can lose it through something called denitrification. We see less of that, but that's when you would see ponded water, literally flooded soils, not just saturated. And then we can lose it through volatilization, which is gaseous loss to the atmosphere from urea-based fertilizers.
Assume this is a case-by-case basis as to how much you lost?
Yeah, I would be hard-pressed to give you specific numbers, and primarily because everything in the nitrogen cycle and availability and loss is based on the weather, temperature, moisture conditions, soil type, how you applied it. So you can control some of those things. You can certainly control timing, but loss is largely determined by the weather.
So walk me through a few of those and how they make an impact, such as soil temp and the way you applied it or the form you applied it in.
Sure. So let's start with soil type, because that's a primary factor you can't change, but you can alter your management to fit the situation. So if we were in a sandier or coarse textured soil, leaching would be the primary concern there because water can infiltrate readily and move through that soil profile. Well, nitrogen, the available form for plants that typically is used is nitrate, and that is not to get too technical here, but it's negatively charged. Soil's negatively charged, so it will leach through the soil.
You're speaking my language. This is not over my head, Brian. Come on.
I'm not saying it is. But so with leaching concerns, because it's soluble in water, moves with the water. That's the problem with nitrogen, is it likes to move with the water, and that's a hard thing to control. Even in an irrigated situation, we can't control how much rain we're getting, and we've gotten a lot this spring.
Okay, so the big question, what does the farmer need to do?
Well, to determine what to do, there has to be some assessment of the situation. Now, there's some replanting going on, or may continue depending on the weather. There is an unknown in a lot of growers' minds of, okay, well, I did put, X amount of fertilizer out there, where is it? And so there is no replacement for taking a soil sample broken into different depths. So taking a composite average at those depths to kind of determine, okay, if you applied it at 6 inches, where's that bulk of that fertilizer at now in the nitrate and ammonium form? That's one way to tell. So if that fertilizer is down at 3 and 4 feet, that's a bad sign, because depending on the rest of the season, it's at high risk for further leaching if we continue to get more rain. The corn plants that are up now are very, very early stages. They're hardly taking any nitrogen, and so their roots are going to take a while to get down and start accessing that in, and so that's why we say it's kind of at risk. Now, later in the season, there are tools. After the V8 growth stage, there's different types of sensors, active sensors, imagery from satellites or UAVs, all that good stuff. That can give you an assessment of variability within the field, but those always need to be calibrated against nitrogen sufficient plants to compare, okay, how deficient am I, and can I do anything about it? If you become too deficient, you start to limit yield, and so you need to catch that very early. And so soil sampling is a lot of work, but maybe that's a good thing to do right now if you've put a significant amount of nitrogen out there and you've had a lot of excess rainfall. So if a farmer does, need to apply, and we would recommend in a general fertility management system to always side dress your nitrogen, because timing is critical. The more you put on up front, the more at risk you are. And so if you can time applications, to when the crop is rapidly uptaking that, that's the best. But the source you use and how you apply it matters. So if you would put a urea-based fertilizer out and did not incorporate it with moisture, if it was sitting on top for a week or so, you're going to lose a significant amount of that nitrogen through the process of volatilization. And so if you have the ability to do so, side dress it in the ground or water it in if possible. But nothing, honestly, probably beats fertigation as far as efficiency, because multiple timings are possible, whereas logistically that's very difficult to do with tractor-based systems.
We'll link to more resources on nitrogen management and loss on the Market Journal website. We've told you before how Nebraskans involved in agriculture have had the chance to broaden their knowledge and experience through the Nebraska LEAD Program. The group began 35 years ago and is now looking for applicants for LEAD Class 36. We talked earlier this week with Terry Hejny, the program's director, to learn what a member could get out of their time in the program.
First of all, a network of friends, a network of experts across Nebraska and across the United States and beyond that can help them get the information they need to make good decisions, and being self-confident, being a public speaker.
Who's the target audience?
Well, we're looking for men and women generally between the ages of 25 and 50, involved in production, agriculture, agribusiness, that want to make a difference. They want to be the spokespersons and decision makers for Nebraska agriculture.
Those people during their time in the program, what do they all do?
Well, we don't have that much time, Jeff, but just in a nutshell, first year they'll study local, state, and national issues. They'll do that through 6 in-state seminars that take place across the state of Nebraska. They'll travel to Kansas City, Washington, D.C., and Chicago that first year. The second year there'll be 6 more 3-day theme-based seminars, and also includes the capstone experience, which I would refer to as being the International Study Travel Seminar.
I think a person who's working in the agricultural industry, maybe off the farm, would see an easy benefit to this program. For somebody that's working on the farm, right, what would they get out of it?
Well, for somebody that's farming and ranching, that's producing food for the world, they need to be able to tell the story of what they're doing. They're getting pot shots all the time in the media about the practices that they're using that are unsafe or not proper, but it gives them a chance to be that spokesperson. People hold farmers and ranchers in very high regards, and it's important for a producer to step forward and be that spokesperson.
You mentioned some of the international travel. Where have you gone in the past, and what have participants been able to get out of those experiences?
Well, this last year we traveled to Hungary, Romania, and Moldova. And I think about Romania, and a country that, they've been out of communist rule now for about 25 years. They're making some strides. They've got a long ways to go, but I saw some of the most productive soils that I almost thought I was here in Nebraska. And they'll have the opportunities to become a major producer. They're going to be competitors against our American farmers that raise corn and soybeans. And so there's some things that the people learn as they're traveling in these foreign countries that they can bring back home.
If you're interested in applying, what do you need to do?
Well, they need to contact us right away, Jeff. It's 402-472-6810 is our phone number. The application deadline is June 15th. We have almost 1,000 Nebraska residents that have been through this program, and so time's running out if they want to be considered.
What do you think they need to be aware of before they get involved in the program?
Well, they got to be aware that it's going to be a time commitment. But what isn't a time commitment anymore? They're going to juggle their family, their job, they're going to juggle LEAD. 1,000 people were able to do it, so I think they can too.
Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension Associate State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Of course, during this last week, we dealt with successive waves of energy moving out of the southwestern U.S. trough that brought thunderstorm activity to the state. Probably the heaviest concentration of heavy precipitation occurred as we got into Thursday with a warm front lifting up from Kansas, touched off a line of thunderstorms from southern Nebraska moving up toward the northeast. And then behind that, of course, we've seen all the tornadic activity that originated in east central and north central Kansas, moving up into southern Nebraska. The good news is as we go out into later next week, we start to see a drier pattern materialize. How long it'll last remains to be seen, but at least there's some hope in sight that we'll get a few days of drying. But more importantly, as we go and look at the latest ENSO update, we basically are looking at the sea surface temperature in the equatorial Pacific. We'll notice that last month we talked about this cold pocket starting to develop in the eastern Pacific that has now raced east or westward and now takes over from much of the central Pacific, although it is not a very wide regime. It is the initial start. Underneath of that, we got cold water all the way from Australia to South America. So the Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia has indicated that this El Nino event is over. We haven't seen that come out of the U.S. Climate Prediction Center yet in terms of the ending of this El Nino. And from the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, they're indicating that they believe the La Nina will begin sometime between June and August. So with that in mind, the Climate Prediction Center's latest release of the summer precipitation forecast shows above normal precipitation over the Central Plains. But as we get into the August, September, October period, we see this below normal precipitation. So remember that when we see these areas, doesn't mean the entire period is going to be below normal. There can be distinct periods of wet or dry conditions. In a further update, look at this with this week's edition of Crop Watch, cropwatch.unl.edu, and I'll talk more in detail about this event. Now, in terms of the upper air pattern, here's what remains of that trough. The first piece of energy going to our northeast, touching off the thunderstorm activity as we go into tomorrow. We're expecting another piece of energy that's going to ride toward the northeast, although there is a slight ridging. A lot of this precipitation may stay to our south. And as we go into Monday, we see yet another piece of energy trying to make its way up to the northeast with a piece of trough trying to move down toward the southeast. So we'll see a convergence of precipitation, possibly some decent thunderstorm activity on Monday, which is Memorial Day. As we get into Tuesday, we see this trough starting to race toward the southeast, which will touch off another line of heavy thunderstorm activity across the state in the Central Plains. But as we go into Wednesday, we start to see this trough moving toward the Great Lakes, pushing a cold front through our region, so we'll start to see a much drier trend on the backside of this. And hopefully this will last for a few days in this northwest flow. As we get into Thursday, of course, we see this ridge trying to build in as the trough tries to deepen over the Great Lakes, bring a little bit warmer and drier weather to our region. And as we get into Friday, there are signs of a slight buckle in the jet stream over the Great Lakes, but it keeps the dry conditions into our place, and it really holds it till at least Sunday. So we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, we see from next Thursday through the following Tuesday, basically below normal temperatures to the south, above normal to the west as that ridge builds in. But more importantly, we start to see a drier pattern materializing over the northern plains, with the wet conditions basically from the southern border of Nebraska southward. So overall, we do have a chance for drier conditions next week. We'll wait to see whether or not models are up to speed on this or if they're being too aggressive with this dry pattern. But overall, at least there's some hope in sight that we will start to see a drier pattern materialize as we get into the middle of next week.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on selling corn and soybeans, Brazil's second crop harvest, nitrogen loss, and the Nebraska LEAD Program. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Next week, John Moret will look at corn and soybean markets, and DTN's Todd Neely will discuss the EPA's proposed renewable fuel volumes for 2017. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.